Yes, hello. It's Jason Louv. Welcome back to the Ultraculture Podcast. My guest today I've wanted to talk to for a long time. He's one of those hidden masters who you should definitely be aware of. His name is Jeff Hoke, H-O-K-E, and he created something called the Museum of Lost Wonder, which I first came across when it was a series of zines in the Bay Area in the early 2000s. You can now get it as a book called The Museum of Lost Wonder from Wiser. It's on Amazon. And where do I even begin describing this phenomenal artifact? It's a lot more than a book. It's kind of like an alchemical pop-up book that is also a museum, like a guided museum tour into the history of Western Esotericism and alchemy and your own inner mind. It's full of projects you can do, puzzles and optical illusions and pop-ups, and you can spend hours getting lost in this thing. It is just incredible and one of the coolest, certainly one of the coolest books on the Western tradition I've ever seen, and it is criminal that more people don't know about this because it's been out for a long time now, and people should definitely be aware of it and get a copy of it, for God's sake. It's so cool. You can leave it on a coffee table, and all of your friends and relatives who want to know what this crazy stuff you're into is, you can show them this and they'll just become fascinated with it and be lost in wonder like a little kid, and they'll get it. All right, so Jeff and I spoke about all kinds of amazing stuff in this podcast. We talked about the alchemical tradition. We talked about Tibetan Buddhism, all kinds of incredible stuff. And you're really, really going to dig it. And of course, magick.me, my online school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, will give you all of the tools and techniques to actually participate in the Western tradition for enlightenment and personal growth, and the Eastern ones for that matter. We have everything there: astral projection, hermeticism, chaos magic, and our brand new course, Mastering Meditation, which is, in my ever so humble opinion, the greatest course on meditation on the planet, at least on the internet part of the planet. Check it out, magick.me, magick.me. There's a whole university of techniques for you to learn right there after you explore the Museum of Lost Wonder with Jeff Hoke. So with no further ado, here he is. So, Jeff, I have here the original issues of Guide to Lost Wonder.
Oh, you don't?
I do.
Wow.
And the full book as well, as I've been a fan for a long time.
Oh, amazing.
So yeah, I bought all these. I think I may have bought them from you. I can't remember because it was a long time ago now. But I bought these at the San Diego Comic Convention.
Oh, really?
A long time ago. So if you were manning the booth, I probably bought them from you.
Oh, then we've met. Oh, how amazing. Yeah, that was at an APE, Alternative Press Expo. Or later, I think San Francisco got its own sort of Comic-Con.
Maybe it was then, because I did go to APE in San Francisco like 2002 or so. So maybe it was then. I don't know. But I have loved your work for a long time, and it's mysterious and wonderful and alchemical and occult in the truest sense. And I've wanted to talk to you about it for a long time. And so I guess maybe just to start off, if you want to tell people who you are, what the Museum of Lost Wonder is, and how you came to work on this.
Okay. I've worked in museums for 35 years. And formerly, I was an art student. I got a degree in fine arts and one in education. And after working in the museum biz for so long, I hadn't done much artwork, and I had to put the two of them together. It kind of made sense because museums were all I knew. So I took my creative life and professional life and put them together and made this fantasy museum. So I could, put anything I wanted to, because museums are great. I could do music if I wanted to, I could make sculpture, I could paint, I could draw, I could write. So it became a home to my creativity. And I started doing it with these, very simple little, 16-page scenes in each chapter. And I wanted them to be like activity booklets for kids that you might get from a museum, but of course they were for adults. It was sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but also to reemphasize, to have a sense of childlike wonder. So, museums were mostly about, trying to push some academic or scientific agenda onto the people. They want to sell science. But I wanted to do something about, the people, something for the reader. So I started out with basic human questions. So I mined basic philosophical questions like, who am I? Where am I going? How did everything begin? Where do I go from here? And in each zine, I addressed each little magazine. I addressed these by posting what science would say about the question, and then what myth or esotericism would say about it. And so that was a lot of fun. And I could draw pictures to illustrate these examples. So that's what I did. I started out after about the first 6 scenes under the heading The Museum Lost Wonder. I realized I had to flush that out and show people the museum. So I did a 3-4 issue series where I sort of made a cartoon tour where I had this little kid take people through the museum so they could see it. And I named the halls after alchemical processes.
What was it about alchemy that inspired you to so much? I mean, there's so much alchemical and kind of medieval symbolism in these books. What was it about alchemy? Was it just the sense of wonder, or was there something more about it that intrigued you?
Well, I was really afraid to use alchemy as this organizing theme for the museum because of its reputation. It's just not, it doesn't have any respect.
Yes.
And it's seen as a lot of foolishness for a long time. But, and I still think that, but that was until I read a Jungian book on alchemy, where it talks about it as a sort of psychological, spiritual process that leads to what Jung called integration, which is putting the conscious and subconscious minds together to create a sense of wholeness. And this suddenly made a lot of sense, and it made it a very rich area. So that's how I approach it. The physical side is interesting too, because it has so many metaphorical associations with the psychological, spiritual side, that they reinforce each other. And of course, the more physical you can make an experience, the more memorable it is and the more meaningful it is. That's why in all my zines, I always had a paper model. And the model sort of epitomized the content in each one, so that it could become the idea could become a physical experience.
That's so cool. Yeah. And one thing that always struck me about, whether it's now considered silly or not, but, kind of proto-science in the, early Renaissance is that the disciplines were not separated yet. So it was this idea that science, myth, alchemy, magic, literature, scripture, everything was tied up in one pursuit for knowledge. And there's something, even if it wasn't sophisticated by our standard, there's something so pure about that, and that has been lost. There is a sense of lost wonder, I think, in the idea that everything is so siloed now and institutionalized, and there is not one single just quest for truth out of curiosity.
Well said. No, I couldn't agree with you more. That's my favorite time period, is around 1620, when you're right, alchemy and science was just starting, and alchemy was still early chemistry, and they hadn't separated them. So yeah, you're right. You used my same words. They were both a path to knowledge. by, physical experimentation. Alchemy had that too.
Yeah, and that's so cool because that's like when you're interested in science as a kid, at least me, it was just like I feel like children somehow are like the purest scientists in a way because they are engaging directly in doing experiments to see what reality is. Or when you get those little science kits when you're a kid, which your book definitely reminds me of, and you just want to know so bad. So, but of course, people who become professional scientists kind of lose that curiosity, perhaps. Hopefully not, but sometimes.
Well, some of them do, some of them don't. Yeah, it was that, right. It's that childlike wonder I wanted to capture in the book and keep that, and in the website, and keep it playful and keep it interesting and make it personally meaningful to people, not just about trying to, educate people on whatever agenda there is, but getting them involved in a sense of play for these, very basic philosophical ideas, which are very personal to everybody.
What is it about that period? I mean, it's such a specific period, 1620. I think that was what the publication of the Rosicrucian Manifestos, or maybe not. What was it about that period specifically that is so interesting to you?
So much happened around then. One of the big last supporters of alchemy and early supporters of science, since they were both the same, was King Ludwig of Bavaria, now Czechia, which was thought of as the sort of queen and heart of Europe. And it was this sort of educational center for Europe at the time. And Ludwig, if I'm getting his name right, anyway, he brought together alchemists, scientists, everyone to do this. He eventually gets in trouble with the church, of course. Church hates all this. It hates alchemy because the spiritual side competes with them, and other, Catholic nations went to war against. Well, the church got everyone together and went to war against the King of Bavaria, and they lost at the Battle of White Mountain, which is right near Prague. And it was sort of the death of this sort of idealism from the era. And scientists, everyone, they scattered. And because of that, scientists also started to remove themselves from alchemy to escape prosecution from the church. So, and then amongst themselves, they became their own sort of academic hierarchy, just like the church, and would weed themselves out by, calling each other magical thinkers, blah, blah, blah. Just, it hasn't changed today.
Yes. Yeah, that period of history is so fascinating to me. I spent about 4 years working on a book about John Dee. And he and is obviously just a fascinating character and right there at the crossroads of magic and science. But he spent a lot of time in Prague and Bohemia during that time and may have inspired some of these movements. And that cultural period is just so fascinating in that it was this kind of brief, cultural explosion of alternate thinkers and science and art and Bohemianism in the true sense, because it was Bohemia, and the king was, well into magic himself, which I apparently didn't do him many favors historically, but just what a beautiful and idealistic period of history. And I feel like, I don't know if you've been to Prague, but
yes,
it was phenomenal, right?
It is phenomenal. I went there. I went to go visit, and I found that an Alchemy Museum was opening in nearby Kutná Hora, and I wanted to see it, but it wasn't open yet. So anyway, I emailed the curator and asked him if he needed any help, which is my sneaky way of getting myself in to see what he had. So I spent a month there helping him, design and put up this it was the world's first Alchemy Museum at the time. We got to work with some of the academics who were studying this in Prague, and it was really marvelous. But another thing, like you said earlier, was that in that time period, was the Rosicrucian Manifestos came out, which really had a huge impact across Europe and early scientists, because it was this call to action for people to, call to action for science, and to get people to join them, of course, in secret. And their only duty, they said, was to heal the sick for free. But it was this very egalitarian organization in secret that no one knows if it's real or not still. But it really sort of energized, scientists from all over Europe, who then started writing. They would publish things asking to join. You had to do it anonymously. So who knows if they were ever contacted. But it really created a real stir, and got Rene Descartes a part of it, because after he was at the Battle of White Mountain in Prague and the sort of Prussian army or something, and after that battle, he sort of disappears, and then he shows up in Paris, and people there's this whole Rosicrucian scare, this Rosicrucian furor in Paris, where people they're seen as demonic and hidden and bad, and they accuse Descartes of being a Rosicrucian, and he goes, "Well, I'm not invisible; you can see me, right?"
Yes.
So yeah, there's so many famous people and seminal history in philosophy that goes on then, and really changes the thinking of the West. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite stories ever. And one of my favorite books ever is The Rosicrucian Enlightenment by Francis Yates.
Oh, mine too.
It's such a great book, right?
Yeah.
I read that in my early 20s, and it completely, I just loved it so much. It changed my way of it changed my thinking about what was possible in the current day, because just this story of, if I remember, the Rosicrucian Manifestos they said that there were Rosicrucians working in secret all over Europe to bring a new age of enlightenment in science, but they were the invisible college. They were the invisibles, and the only you couldn't contact them, except the only method was to take some, if I'm remembering correctly, take some radical action for science anonymously and enlightenment anonymously, and credit it to the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. So this, of course, happened all over Europe all at the same time. So that this myth made itself real overnight. There may have never been more Rosicrucians than a few people. It's possible that, they were people in John Dee's circle, or possibly even John Dee himself, but I see that as such a true act of magic. It just created itself out of nothing, and then led to modern science and the modern world, and possibly America.
Yeah, John Dee is mentioned in the pamphlets, which is amazing.
He is. I was not aware of that.
I did a whole chapter in the book. In the next book, but one of my zines is called Tomb of Illumination. It's in the Folios on my website, and I based that on Yates's book, The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. But I started it because I got so intrigued by the description of Christian Rosenkreuz's tomb in the first manifesto, which was so totally detailed. It even gave dimensions of the walls, all the geometry, what was on the walls, the ceiling, there were chests in the walls, what was in the chests. And then his tomb is in there. So I searched all over the internet and the libraries. I said, this is so famous, I'm sure someone must have built it. I couldn't find anything. The only thing I could find of anyone to recreate it was that Order of the Golden Dawn had sort of recreated a little Rosicrucian temple from that description out of painted bed sheets in a cardboard box for the for the coffin, and that was it. And I'm going, oh my God, this is wrong. So I had to take my own advice and do it myself. So from there, I launched into getting as much other peripheral information that historians had written, but I made a model, a working model, paper model of his tomb. And it's the most
awesome.
It's the most popular, model I have on my website, and Rosicrucians from around the world, buy it and ask about it. I even had people starting to recreate that tomb life size.
Oh, wow.
From my model.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a couple of guys from England that said they wanted to build it in their backyard. And I don't know if they have, but there's another guy who's recreating it. He's a Rosicrucian with plastic pipe and canvas, so it can be transported and put up and down in different temples. But my paper model became a sort of activity for the lodge in Toronto, and they have that displayed in their lodge, the paper model. So it's been really fun.
That's awesome. I have to check that out. That might maybe even something to create in on the in virtual reality or something like that. I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
Well, I don't know how to do that, but I did take a class in Flash before that died on the internet. And if you go on the website, you have to go under the Curio tab on the top. There's a section called Folios, and in there is all the chapters for the next book. And you'll see one of the tomb is the Tomb of Illumination, but you can go and with that model and all the models, you can go in and play with them. I animated so you can interact with it.
Oh, awesome.
So you can open the tomb and take the chests out and open the chests and hear them, and take Christian out from his tomb, and and then put it all back together again. So that was a lot of fun.
That's so cool.
There's about a half a dozen other models like that. One of them is the Mysterium Cosmographicum, which was a geometric model of the universe that was thought to be correct at the time. But you can take that apart and put that together too.
I got to check that out. Let me ask you this. When you were in Prague working on that museum, how did your perspective on any of this change? Did you have a sense of a connection to something historical that had happened, a sense that there was still, a vibe continuing into the present? Did your perspective on whether Christian Rosenkreutz was a real person or not change, or just the overall history?
No, not in believability, but it did reinstill. I worked, working with these academics and these people that studied this stuff, and it reinstilled this idea of how important alchemy was as a search for knowledge, and how important it is for Western history, because it works with all these mythic symbols and things which are very still relevant today. So, it gave it more credibility for me.
What was it about alchemy that you think was so critical to history in that sense, and so important?
Well, it was the only sort of chemistry and science going back to Egypt. So, experimentation and how you deal with raw materials and refining. And it just launched so many discoveries. I don't even know if it was always, it was alchemy, alchem, which comes from Egypt. So yes, it's so much very important part of Western history and our culture, and the beginnings of science and just knowledge, because they didn't separate the physical from the metaphysical ever. That was recent, just after in the 1700s was that separated. Plus, Egyptians didn't have the Catholic Church to worry about. So.
Yes. Yeah. And you really had to worry about them back then. Do you feel I sometimes wonder if we can really think about science now as still separated, though, because it seems much less separate now than maybe it did 100 years ago. And I wonder if that separation was possibly just a phase. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I don't think it's a phase. I think science still has to be separate. I mean, if you're a scientist, you have to do the scientific method.
Sure.
And, do science according to that. But there are many, scientists who are also very spiritual. Some of my favorite quotes are from a physicist, Fritjof Capra, who said, science does not need mysticism and mysticism does not need science, but men and women need both.
I love that.
And then
That's
Einstein
great.
has one.
Yeah, Einstein was interested in alchemy, wasn't he?
Oh, he was interested in everything, but he quoted, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind.
Yeah.
So, I think it's personal to the person. I think if because I've worked with academics all my life in museums, and their whole thing is publishing and gaining their credibility by being recognized by other scientists. So it's very competitive, and they have to be very watchful for not being accused of magical thinking. So,
right.
Any of their spiritual leanings, I think, are taken off the table when they actually are involved with other academics. So in that way, yes, it has to remain separate and always will be. But, when you think of how science begins as hypothesis, that's just, that's a fantasy, that's a guess. That's something that comes out of the imagination. Hypotheses are from fantasies, but they need to be tested to be made real. You think of Einstein's unified field theory, which was this theory which hasn't been proven yet, but there's this mythic dream part of it that everyone wants to find this overriding one law to explain everything, which is really sort of mythic and grand in its goal. And it's still very much a dream, but, one that many scientists still chase. So, I think, myth and imagination are very much part of science. That's what inspires it. That's how, people want to know something, is something real? Are UFOs real? Are angels real? Whatever. If you can come up, as a scientist, you'd come up with a testing method to try and prove it. Sort of fantasizing and the imagination is very important to science in the beginning. That's what spurs them on.
Definitely. It just seems to me that, there's only one curiosity. It's like, there's just curiosity about how the universe works. That's what people have, and it's not compartmentalized. And the disciplines of pursuing that may be compartmentalized, but the impulse is the same. And I guess what I meant when I was talking about maybe science is a little bit more, it's not quite as distinct anymore. I agree with you. Technically, yes, it is completely distinct, but we see interest in things like studying the nature of consciousness, of the brain, under meditation states, and certainly the interest of the public is very much in both camps, and I think the public sees science in kind of a mystic way.
Yeah, it certainly is. There's a lot of math, which has always been mystical to me.
Yeah, and math like John Dee says, right. Math is God's way of talking, and the only possible way you can talk back. And I think it's kind of an incontrovertible statement in a way. It's like it's the only true thing we can actually hold on to.
Yeah, funny.
Well, let's talk about modern people. I mean, so alchemy outside of its historical context. What is it? What interest is it, or what what can it offer modern people? I mean, you talked about Jung and the idea of using alchemy as a metaphorical language for psychological individuation, which I think if you hear people talking about it in any way that is taken seriously, that is, or at least slightly taken seriously, that tends to be the angle they're coming at it from. But what do you think studying these symbols and systems of meaning offer modern people?
Well, I think the psychological and spiritual aspects of alchemy are very relevant for people today. Like we were talking about, its richness in Western symbolism makes a great repository for mythic metaphors and symbols that resonate with the subconscious mind that they want to become conscious. And alchemy's association with the physical elements makes it very grounding to our consciousness by giving them emotional connotations. The first four stages are named after the elements: fire, water, air, and earth. And in sequence, the first one is calcinatio, fire. It's actually pronounced calcinatio, but I like to pronounce the English way. And that's about inspiration and shedding light on things. The next one is water, solutio, which seeks to bring a solution up from the depths of the subconscious. And just that solutio is so close to solution, it just shows you how embedded these alchemical ideas are in our culture and our language. Coagulatio's after that, and that's about earth, and that's about being grounded in the physical world. And then next is sublimatio, which is air, which it seeks to gain heights of the imagination to spur us forward. But all these physical methods also mirror a psychological one. On my website, you can take, I sort of go through this, each one. You can take a tour of the museum and interact with it. And there's always two buttons on the bottom. One is like the chemical meaning of that alchemical process, and then the psychological one. So you can see those two side by side.
Very cool. So what do you think when we consider the alchemical stages psychologically? I've never been totally clear about what that actually means psychologically. And the reason is probably because I've never actually read Jung's writing on that. So I probably should. But when we talk about these stages like, calcinatio and things like this, purely from a psychological angle, what are we talking about? Are we talking about like periods of somebody's life, of psychological stages they mature through, or is it something else in your opinion?
Good question. I think you can relate it to a lot of things, to the situation you're in at the moment. I've never really read it going through like stages of one's life, but it is a way of approaching different problems or things you want to seek. Just like sublimatio is going up in the air to, if you're sort of lost in something, you use this idea of sublimatio to sort of go up high and look down to get perspective on your life and yourself. If you're sort of confused and things, grounding yourself in calcinatio, just going outside, being with nature, grounding yourself in the physical experience is very helpful to quiet the mind. So I think there are sort of different ways to use and sort of meditation exercises, you could say, these different aspects. Solutio is, diving down to the subconscious, going underwater, diving down to see what answers are, can bubble up to the surface, to your conscious mind. So there's just lots of great language and metaphors and symbols that I think are really helpful and using them to approach, problems and goals that you have and want.
Yeah, that seems very straightforward. Yeah, I mean, I see that, and it seems no different to me than, Tibetan meditation mandalas or something like that.
Those mandalas, a lot of them are actually floor plans to buildings.
Are they floor plans for literal buildings to be built or metaphorical?
They're sort of symbols for going into another realm, but, going into that building in another realm. And then you go around and you meet, beings in there to get teachings from. And that's what you do when you meditate on, that's supposed to happen when you meditate on these square mandalas, is you visualize yourself going into the building in this other realm, and then talk to the beings in there to learn from them.
Oh, so it's
sorry to go off topic, but
no, not at all.
I always love that about mandalas.
That's so cool. So it's like a kind of a map for an inner journey you undertake. You're meant to kind of imagine yourself going in and meeting those beings.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. It's like a single player role-playing game. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Sounds fun. I wasn't totally clear on that. No, that's really interesting though.
And they actually have, they built 3D mandalas. I got to see one in Dharamsala when I was there. Some monks showed me. It was hidden away in a room. But yeah, they actually built them in 3D. This one was like silver plated. It was 5 feet tall. It was pretty amazing.
And what were they doing with it? Were they kind of all sitting around meditating on it, or?
Well, it was just in the storeroom. They would bring it out for special occasions when that particular mandala was needed, for a certain ceremony.
That's really cool.
It was just waiting. Yeah.
What brought you to Dharamsala, and what was your experience there like?
Well, I was always interested in Tibet since reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead in high school.
Sure.
Since it was referred to in so many album covers.
Yeah.
Which was, my state of literacy at that time. So I was always fascinated, and finally, I decided I had to go. I had to go and search this out. So I actually went to Tibet with my girlfriend and toured around there for a couple of weeks. And we were lucky because most tours are done by the Chinese, of course. And you had a little Chinese girl, talking about Tibet. She didn't know anything, but we were lucky because I got a Tibetan guide and a driver who took us around and showed us sort of behind the scenes. And I wanted to do something to help out. And he said to get in touch with his family in India, because most Tibetans are, when they left, when the Chinese invaded, India gave them refuge and set up a number of camps. And the biggest one where the Dalai Lama is up in Dharamsala in the north. So I went to India a couple of times and, traveled around with these Tibetans so I could, really learn what it was like from, a human point of view.
And what was your take on it being there? I mean, Tibet is one of those things that people really put a lot of projections on and make into something in their mind because it's so ubiquitous in literature and comics and movies and things like that. But what was it like when you actually got there versus maybe your expectations? What was the reality like for you?
God, it was a very rich experience. So many things. It was going to these places, going to the Patala and, the major cathedrals and things, and seeing how the devotion of the Tibetans was really incredible. But then, being surrounded by, Chinese guards and knowing that, they killed, a million of the people when they invaded. And there's, I got shown the prisons where they put most Tibetans. My guide, who had a dental problem, was afraid to go to the hospital because they didn't treat Tibetans very well in there.
Wow.
So that part was, that was really sad. Tibetans now, they grow up with the same Chinese propaganda that the Chinese people get, and they don't know. when they leave and say go to Dharamsala and meet free Tibetans, they're totally astonished by the real history behind it.
Oh, so you mean Tibetans, young Tibetans in the occupied Tibet?
Yeah.
They do. Wow. Okay.
They
Interesting.
don't know. I mean, it's all.
That's so sad.
It's been since the 50s. So it's been a long time, to be there. So there's not many old folks that remember the old ways, although people are still, well, when I was there, God, it was the 80s. So that's still a very long time ago. So it's changed so much since then. I brought a lot of pictures of the Dalai Lama to people because that was a favorite thing to give that to people when they could have that. And it was dangerous for them to have it or to be shown me giving it to them, but never got caught.
Wow. Yeah. Obviously, it's I think my and everyone's hope that the Tibetan tradition is able to maintain continuity in India and the U.S. as much as possible. But yeah, what a grim situation. I, for many years in Los Angeles, lived in the Armenian community, and there was this real sense of, for them, the Armenian genocide is still living memory. And because they keep it in living memory, but the younger people who grow up in Los Angeles and with social media and phones, it's like they don't really. There's this real concern that they don't really care. At least a lot of them, and that's kind of being lost before the U.S. even has recognized that it even happened. So yeah, I can only imagine a very, very tough position to be in for any group of people.
I think one thing after hanging out with Tibetans and these people is sort of the two aspects of Tibetan Buddhism. On the outset, it's not really a religion; it's a philosophy, right? It's not a series of beliefs; it's a series of practices for you to see for yourself what you do through meditation, etc., which takes a lot of serious study and reading. And that's what monks are. They're academics. I mean, the literature, Tibetan literature is amazing. The books are amazing. But there's an outside of it, which for, normal people who aren't academics, are not going to study Buddhism like that. It had all the trappings of Catholicism in a way. There's all these big scary symbols. There's angels and demons, scary stories. I asked my Tibetan friend, about reincarnation, and he said he was taught that the chances of being reincarnated as a human is the chance that a turtle in the middle of the ocean has of, coming up and poking his head through a hole in a board in the middle of the ocean.
We can only hope that's a teaching metaphor and not actually real.
Well, yeah, but it kind of, I was like, oh my God, this is, there's so many aspects to this here. And, I realized, God, I wasn't going to start learning Tibetan and reading Tibetan. And I didn't dream in their symbols.
Yeah.
I didn't grow up in a culture with their symbols. So, they were meaningless to me. So that's when I started getting interested in Western esotericism because it's part of our culture.
Yeah, let's talk about this because this question, right, what you just brought up, I mean, this is pretty much one of the central questions for me of my whole life. I haven't been to Dharamsala, but I did go to Kathmandu twice and northeastern India and the rest of India. For some reason, I didn't go to Dharamsala, so I got to go back and go. I went up into the mountains in the Himalayas, but I need to go to Dharamsala. But, in Kathmandu, there's tons of Tibetans, and you see they have Swayambhunath temple, and, they have their schools there, and you get the academic sense of it, and you get how it's an almost military order. And I don't mean that obviously at all in a militant or violent sense, because they're the complete opposite, but just in how regimented and disciplined they are. And you kind of look around at this and you think why don't we have this? And then, so I think that, the great dream is then to come back and say what is the Western esoteric tradition? Is it something that could be comparable to this? What would it be like if it was, able to operate out in the open without, I don't think we really have to worry about the Catholic Church. I mean, at least not to the same extent anymore. But the thing about the Western tradition, obviously, is that it is occulted because it had to hide for so long, to the point, like we were talking with Rosicrucian Manifestos, you kind of have to wonder whether it actually really even existed at all outside of, artistic inspiration and writing and some people's dreams. And that, I was going to mention earlier, the one city that I've been to where you kind of get a tangible sense of this actually having been a thing is Prague, right? But even then it's kind of like, well, what was this thing, and was it ever even allowed to fully manifest in reality? Are we maybe over romanticizing something that wasn't there?
I think, it's evolved with, Western esotericism evolved into various philosophies. There's people like Ken Wilber, et cetera,
sure.
Who are carrying on some of these same ideas, but really it doesn't have the sort of practices or practical meditation applications that Buddhism does, which I think is sort of missing. It's this way to, get in touch with your subconscious by yourself.
So you don't think that, for instance, the Golden Dawn counts for that, or all the stuff of Western magic?
Yeah, I could never get into Western magic. It was so much into the ritual and the costumes and, the naming and the hierarchy. It always sort of put me off. So yeah, I never got into any of the sort of practices because they seem to be most around ceremonial magic, not about any personal, in-depth practice you could do by yourself.
Yes, I will agree and disagree. And I teach magic for a living. So
okay, well, excuse my ignorance.
Well, I'm only hoping to share my enthusiasm in the sense that the Masonic level of it and the outer ceremonial level of it is very pompous and silly, in my opinion. It is very like a theater kid type approach to things. But people love dressing up. Certain people do. The interior practices, though, are very much present and are. I think there was always a sense within those kind of Rosicrucian Masonic or Hermetic orders, which are all kind of, in my opinion, a continuum of the same thing, that you would kind of do these temple initiations that were Masonic style, but that was just to, I think, honestly, I think in the exact same way that you were just talking about with these kind of Tibetan mandalas of buildings, that these were outer enactments of interior processes you were then meant to undertake yourself. And in my experience, the Western tradition is full of those interior methods, a lot of which are borrowed from Buddhism and Hinduism, like yoga and things like this, but also a lot of which are unique. And so I think that in my experience, that's kind of the closest we have to something comparable, although it's not as beautiful. I don't think it's not as perhaps sophisticated in some ways. It doesn't have the continuity of practice, but however, it's ours. So it is full of symbols that resonate with Western people, like alchemy or the Arthurian legends or Masonic symbolism or European history or Egyptian things like this. So I have to give my vote of confidence for it. But it's certainly a confusing mess, I will grant you.
Yeah, I think it doesn't have this one monolithic institution that Buddhism does. I mean, there's different schools, right? But they basically have similar practices. Yeah. So, to follow it's tough. And that's why, it sort of left me off, or I don't see it as the things I like. I don't see as magic. I think it's just a great practice, a great meditation practice.
Yeah, it would be great if, you mentioned Ken Wilber. One of the things that I've tried to do in my career is it would be great if, look, like Western magic has always been an outsider pursuit. It's always been a countercultural pursuit. And a big part of that was, I think, the Catholic Church. And we're kind of left with the shadow of that. But I think it would be great if it could be perceived in the way you were just describing, in the same way that Buddhism, for instance, in America now is perceived as not scary or spooky in any way. You know, even if it actually is, like you were saying, full of kind of terrifying stuff. It would be great if the Western tradition could be seen more in that light, perhaps.
Yeah, it's hard to parse. It all got split apart because of the church, like you said, et cetera. And, nowadays, like, it's just up to the individual to, mix and match and find things that resonate with them, for your own growth, and which I think is probably for the best, the way to do it, because there are so many ways in, and you have to, everyone's so very different, and different things are going to be more meaningful to people than the others. Some people just like meditation. Ritual is good. The chanting, they do induce different psychological states that are very helpful. So, but like some people aren't in the ritual and some people are. So, it takes a lot of work. Well, it all takes a lot of work.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just feel like, what the Western tradition, it perhaps, maybe to put it charitably, just exists, it seems to me, in this kind of liminal state where it kind of half exists and half doesn't. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe that's actually quite important for it to be like that, where it is kind of an invisible college that manifests in certain ways where you can see it, but not all the way. And it's only half formed. And, at the same time, you want there to be, like for me, it's like I want to go to Prague and find that it's like Dharamsala, there's a living tradition there, that this always existed, that it wasn't just in my head.
Yeah.
And you kind of only get the hint that something existed. You get a pointers in certain directions. You get kind of like the shadow or the footprint of something that may or may not be there. But I think maybe there's a lesson in that too, in the sense that, you have to make it real in your own life.
Yeah, you have to personalize it, and find your own path through all of it.
Definitely. So, on that note, what is your own path been like working on these books and these zines? Has your opinion about some of these traditions, or just about kind of reality in general, changed over the course of your artistic work?
Oh, sure. That's why you do them. You don't paint a painting if you know what it's going to be, because it's done in your mind. Why even, do it? Writing these zines and the book has, I have a question in my mind. I'll have an idea or something I read which inspired me, and I want to write about it. And I realize that I really don't know jack. So it leads me to read more and investigate and learn. So, each time I write, it's a great learning experience, and I get to go deeper, and it takes me places I wouldn't normally go. It's just like reading books. You go to the bibliography and that takes you to the next one, to try and answer, a question you might have, or, just open up a whole nother field of inquiry. So they've been, they're a great learning experience for me. Is also, it's, personally, it's sort of a mnemonic device, because I can't remember all these interesting facts and different things. So to write them down and draw pictures of them helps me to integrate those ideas and remember them and be part of them. So it's, they are an expression in the end, yes, but they're sort of a tool, learning tool for me when I do them.
That was simple, like a memory palace.
Very much so, yes.
You have a YouTube online where which is great, and you have a quote in that, which is, "We create meaning by combining our past experiences with our present reality." And I thought that was really great. Do you still feel that that's true?
Oh, yeah, very much so. meaning doesn't happen in a vacuum. Meaning happens by association with things. Say if you have a meal, you eat. Could be good, could be bad, but it's sort of meaningless. It's a meal, but it can be meaningful if you start to remember, other places you've had this sort of food or people you've had them with, other experiences you had, and then it makes it meaningful. I don't know if that's the best example.
Definitely. Well, let me ask you this. So just as a general point of curiosity, what are you working on now? What do you have coming up? And are there things that you still want to explore? Like, are there other, do you feel like you've kind of explored the traditions and areas you want to, or are there other things that you want to branch out into?
Gosh, yes. Everything's fascinating. Right now, I'm doing a memoir. So it's sort of an autobiography, which has been great to kind of, put your life in some sort of made up order and put a positive slant on it. So, and that's also in a way which I can put down, what are my sources for what I know, what I'm interested in, my experience that I've had. So it's been a learning experience in itself to do that. So, I guess it's a way of going deeper into myself was in writing this, and then just, practicing some of the things I've learned and, seeing what's in my subconscious.
So do you feel like you're exploring yourself as a memory palace or a structure?
In a way. Yeah, it's been useful. I've been to hypnotists a few times and try and learn self-hypnosis along with meditation. I use both of them.
What's your experience with that been like?
Well, all over the mat, but I've had some really wonderful experiences with it, and come up with some, very strange visions, also from dreams. But some hypnotists are better than others. I had one old guy recommended it to me, and I asked him, I was told you can teach me self-hypnosis. And he sort of forgot about that. And, every week he would sink back to his normal, business as usual of asking people about their workday. Because I think that was how they make most of their money, is people bitching about bitching about their day, which is mostly about work.
Yeah.
So I had to keep getting him off of that and go, take me under. But he finally did. And I had this amazing experience of when I was 9 months old, my parents my father was a carpenter. He brought in this big wooden hutch and he left the back door open in this 2-story Chicago apartment. And I was 9 months old, and I crawled outside and leapt off the balcony and landed on my head. Oh. A lady next door saw me. She screamed. Somehow I was fine. But anyway, later with this hypnotist, and I didn't even ask for this, it just came up, but he took me under, and I had this experience of being in that kitchen again and being hugged by my father. And it was so overwhelming. It was just this feeling of overwhelming joy from him. It was very emotional when I got. And I was this baby he was hugging. And then my mother took me in her arms, and there was just this overwhelming, feeling of love, just expansive. I've never experienced anything like that again. So I guess, well, hopefully there was some Jungian integration going on there, but yeah.
That's a pretty incredible imprint.
Yeah.
Why don't we wrap it up for now? That was a wonderful interview, and
well, thanks, Jason. You were great.
Thank you very much for talking to me. Where can people find out about your work? And my dog. Speaking of carpentry, my dog just knocked over this super heavy soundboard and tried to kill me.
Scared Charlie. Yeah. So at the end now, I can pitch my website.
Yes, please. Yeah, tell us where to find your work and your books and anything that you have upcoming as well.
Okay. Well, the website's fun, www.lostwonder.org. here. You can take an interactive tour of the museum, which is fun, which goes through different parts of alchemy, like I was mentioning. And there's lots of things to click and sounds happen. I mean, it's basically simple. It's not really a game, but that's sort of fun. And then, going to the folio section, I have a lot of the paper models I was talking about. They're also animated and interactive, so you can play with them. And you can also, you can buy my book there and also see the other folios, and which will be chapters to the next book.
Excellent.
And that has where I address. I go a lot deeper than the first book. I go into specific things in history, and it's fun.
Excellent. And I'm guessing Museum of Lost Wonder is on Amazon, and I think you had a sequel to that, right? There's a second one.
Not yet.
No, you're still working on it.
Yeah, I have all the chapters, but I got to find the publisher.
Well, I'm sure that'll go great. I mean, the Weiser edition of Lost Wonder is phenomenal, and I definitely recommend it to everyone listening. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to that, and thank you again for being on the show.
And Jason, it's been great. It's been fascinating. I've learned a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you again later, I hope. All right. Hope you really, really enjoyed that. Meet us at magick.me, magick.me, the world's greatest and premier school for magic, meditation, and mysticism, where the Western and Eastern traditions will be unfurled before your eyes, like the scrolls of ancient wisdom before Doctor Strange, and the powers of the cosmos will be yours to unlock. All right. See you there.